Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, August 26, 2024. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Connetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And honcho at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and Commentary's own contributing editor, Jonathan Schanzer. Hi, John.
Hey, John.
So, Jonathan, you come to us, as you often do, either in anticipation of or in the wake of major moves in the Middle East. And we had such a major move this weekend, Saturday night, Sunday morning, 15 minutes before Hezbollah was going to launch a major barrage of missiles and rockets at Israel. Israel struck Hezbollah first. And can you give us a sense of what Hezbollah was planning and what Israel disrupted?
Sure. Well, I mean, from what we understand, there were a number of targets that they were trying to hit, military-related targets. Specifically, I believe Unit 8200, the cyber command of Israel, was a key target because 8200 has been identifying a lot of the targets that Israel has been striking over the last several weeks. The Mossad, the Shin Bet, and perhaps another target or two were also included. At one point, the Israeli media was saying that they were up to 6,000 rockets that were prepared to launch. That strikes me as a little high, but still, certainly possible. With just a few minutes to go and a timer that was going to unleash all of them at once, the Israelis were able to take them all out. I think this probably prevented a major war in the north, one that we have been talking about here and we've been worried about on this program. And I think, obviously Israel's not going to get any credit for preventing a war through a preemptive strike. But I think it probably saved a lot of damage in Israel the other night. The Israelis showing once again the incredible intelligence collection that they have at their disposal, and the fact that they were able to scramble 100 jets in very short order to take care of this, also a remarkable operation.
You know, we keep talking about Israel needing to reestablish deterrence. The failure of deterrence is what led to the Hamas attack on October 7th. Israel has clearly not been deterring Hezbollah because Hezbollah has been firing rockets at Israel since October 8th. And they both are in the pocket of, directed by, partially controlled by Iran. And Iran, of course, not precisely deterred either, as it has also activated the Houthis in Yemen to disrupt shipping and attack even American ships, as well as firing, as we know, a couple of weeks ago, a drone directly at Tel Aviv that seemed to be aimed at the American consulate, former embassy in Tel Aviv. And meanwhile, over the last month, Israel seems to be taking actions, the purpose of which is to reestablish deterrence without a major war or without major military conflict. And these efforts are bearing fruit, and no one seems to be giving Israel credit for these efforts bearing fruit. So the assassination of the Hamas leader in Iran, for example, we have been waiting with bated breath for Iran to retaliate. Iran has not yet retaliated. We are then given all kinds of reasons why Iran has not yet retaliated, including reasons that beggar the mind, any rational mind, if you think about it. Like, Iran is restraining itself because it really, really wants to help the Americans and the Qataris and the Egyptians find a final deal for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And so they're restraining themselves in order to give that negotiation space. Are people insane? Iran wants to be a party to a wonderful ceasefire deal that will return Israeli and American hostages to their families and finally bring an end to this terrible, to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people? Does any rational person who is not either in the direct or indirect pay of Iran actually believe that this is a motivating factor for the Iranian government?
It's certainly possible that people who are on crack or meth or some other potent mind-altering drug might believe that. Look, I will say this, and I think we can't rule it out. This administration continues to do outreach to Iran. They are still convinced that Iran can become a partner in the region or a responsible player in the region. It could be. And I've heard this from Israeli contacts. I actually had Ehud Yari of Israeli Channel 12 this morning on the FDD Morning Brief, and he was intimating that they're still trying to get financial perks from the U.S. And it could be that the U.S. is saying, look, we're going to offer you X number of $1 billion in sanctions relief yet again, and waivers on oil sales and the like, if you just help us land a deal that brings an end to the conflict that you started. That is a possibility. But let's just be clear. The Iranians are not doing this out of altruism. It's either that they think they're going to extract something from the U.S. because we are terrible negotiators, or they also could be deterred, right? We have actually deployed a massive amount of assets to the Middle East over the last several weeks in the wake of Ismail Haniyeh's assassination and Iran's vow to exact revenge upon Israel. So we've got carrier strike groups, we've got submarines, we've got guided destroyers, we've got all kinds of scary things in the region, and that could be giving the Iranians pause as well.
And let's talk about the Israeli deterrence. Let me just finish the point. So the Israeli deterrence, which is now also, I think, probably infecting Hezbollah at every level, at every moment, is the Iranians don't know what Israel knows, and the Hezbollah really now doesn't know what Israel knows. Israel struck inside Iran, inside Tehran, inside a building, a direct hit on a target planned for months, meaning they have deep penetration of the highest levels of either Iranian communications, the Iranian government in individual terms, and now from the strike on Hezbollah, which is to say that they knew exactly the moment at which Hezbollah's timer was going to go off, and they waited till the last moment to hit the site so that Hezbollah could not stand down or scramble or do whatever it could do to evade the full punishment of the Israeli strike. And if you're Hezbollah or you are the mullahs, you're like, I don't even know if we can talk to each other without Israel knowing exactly what it is that we're saying to each other and what we're going to do next. That's where I look at Iran. Yes, America scrambled a lot of resources to try to make it clear that we mean business. I don't know why they think we mean business, but that we mean business about, deterring them. But this Israeli deterrence, which I think also goes with Hamas, which is this picking off of various Hamas leaders around Sinwar, and going into places that they had cleared, going back in, finding a cadre, getting rid of them in Khan Yunis, moving out, going somewhere else. All of that suggests that Israel now has a complete operational knowledge, or very, very great operational knowledge of the battlefield against it, that is unnerving to its enemies and is freezing them in place.
Yeah, look, it's funny. I've been saying this for a little while now, and I definitely find that I'm in the minority still. And it's nice to hear you actually articulate this too, John. I think the Israelis over the last couple of weeks they were able to take out a senior Hezbollah leader in the heart of Dahia, which is, Hezbollah's stronghold in Beirut. The same day they take out Ismail Haniyeh in an IRGC compound in Tehran. Then they hack the central bank of Iran and they send the Iranian regime into a tailspin. Then they take out these Hezbollah rocket launchers in the manner that you describe. On top of that, we've seen a number of senior Hezbollah commanders go boom. Those that were riding in cars or in motorcycles, and they're destroyed, just in a blink of an eye by precision munitions that are launched, from either drones or from F-35s or F-16s in the air. In the meantime, as you also suggest, the Israelis have been slowly but steadily picking apart Hamas. Hamas may still be an idea, but its leadership is thinned out, right? That idea is not being articulated particularly well or by a large number of people any longer because they are all getting wiped out. So when I look around right now, I see across the region an Israeli intelligence apparatus that has found its mojo again, right? I mean, these guys right now are feeling it, and you can tell that they are. And I think for sure this is putting fear into the hearts of the Iranian regime and their proxies. The real question that I have, though, actually, I think maybe two questions. One is this the extent of Israel's strategy in combating the Iranian axis? Is this it, that we're going to just see one targeted strike after another and potentially just erode their will to fight over time because they're going to find all of their senior people picked off, all of their plots foiled? And then, I think maybe the broader question, which is, can Iran continue to fight on the cheap? Right? I mean, they've been using proxies in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Gaza and the West Bank. They don't need to fight Israel themselves. They can use Arabs to fight without getting their hands dirty. And that is what they're still doing, even as Israel looks like it's regaining its swagger.
Can I take a step back for a second? I used to think that, and I think we all agreed, that the absence of American leadership incentivized America's enemies, the weapon states, the rogue states, to act more freely. And that's what we have seen in Joe Biden's administration, whether it was the fall of Afghanistan or the invasion of Ukraine or October 7th, the Houthis. What's happened in the past couple months is that the absence of American leadership has also incentivized our allies to act more freely. So we have, on the one hand, all of these moves that Israel has been making since Benjamin Netanyahu's trip to the United States and address to Congress, where he left the United States, I think, thinking, well, to hell with those people. I'm just going to do what I want, and we have to roll up Hamas, and I'm going to take all these opportunities to strike at the leadership of the various militias. I'll take this preemptive strike against the rockets in Lebanon. While we also see in Ukraine, Zelensky say, well, to hell with these people. My morale is low. We're losing ground in Donetsk. So I'm just going to invade Russia and the Kursk region and see what happens there. And maybe that will get some rise out of the Americans and maybe motivate them to actually give me more weapons and more authority. So it's been unexpected for me because I had always been placing all of my focus on the bad guys side. I realize actually now when you have a president who's come back to the East Coast to take his second week of vacation here at Rehoboth Beach and who hasn't been seen in public for days and who the Daily Mail reports was shaking visibly as he was trying to enter his SUV leaving California, actually our allies can make the most of this opportunity as well by striking back at the enemy.
This reminds me of the great.
Matt's exactly right, because there's a Ukrainian commander who said as much in a TV interview, saying something to the effect about the incursion in Kursk, that well, like the Israelis, we're not going to live and fight under the restrictions any longer that the U.S. is imposing on us.
Our friend Jason Riley wrote a book about the efforts on behalf in American society to lift up suffering African Americans, which he called "Please Stop Helping Us." And this also reminds me of the one of the greatest of all Jewish jokes, which is that man comes to heaven, is brought to God, says to God, we just want to know. I've been sent up as the delegation from Earth to ask you on behalf of all my fellow Jews, are we the chosen people? And God says, yes, Moshe, you are the chosen people. And Moshe says, would you mind choosing somebody else for a change? That America's focus on helping Israel, very important in the early going of this war. And we do have information today about the size and the scope of the American logistical and equipment support for Israel over the course of the last 10 months. And it is pretty staggering. I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of tons of material that Israel needed to help fight this war. So I do not want to downplay this. However, America's help diplomatically, in terms of negotiation, in terms of its support, all of that has been a very, very, very mixed bag, arguably. We don't really know this. The war in Gaza was slowed by 3 to 4 months by Israel's need to pacify American unease, a lot of it seeming to be political, about the political cost to the administration in a re-election year, and all of that. And so, yes, so in some odd way, what we have here is a kind of welfare state problem where the cost of the help may be higher than the value of the help itself, certainly in the last couple of months. And that's, I think, Matt, your summary is kind of perfect. Now, to give Israel, to make this even more complicated, over the course of the last 2 weeks, the Biden administration has been for some reason arguing or trying to make clear to people that there is a path to a hostage deal and that they are optimistic about it. And Biden, remember, in his speech on Monday at the convention, said he had written a peace treaty, and that basically Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, was in Israel working to implement the peace treaty that he wrote or whatever. Tony Blinken came out of a meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, whom he doesn't like. Nobody likes him. Americans don't. Nobody likes him. And he said, I think Blinken goes in and says, we need this and we need that. We need you to do this and we're going to have this and you should do this in order for us to get this ceasefire. You need to drop this condition. You need to drop that condition. You need to drop the other condition so we can get a ceasefire. And from what we can tell, Netanyahu said, whatever you say, what do you want? You want? Sure. You're going to say we need to negotiate over the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border between Egypt and Gaza? Yeah, okay, fine. You go tell Sinwar that. We're ready to negotiate. Well, whatever you want. So Blinken comes out of the meeting having gotten everything that he wanted out of Bibi and said, well, the Israelis are on board with us. The ball is now in Hamas's court. And you know who was furious about the results of this meeting? The Israeli left, or Israeli liberals. They wanted Blinken to go to Israel and have Blinken make Bibi stop. Make Bibi stop doing whatever he was doing so that there could be a ceasefire and so that there could be a hostage return. So much so that over the course of the last week, some hostage families are now saying that Bibi is more responsible for the hostages remaining in Hamas captivity than anybody else. He doesn't care. He's not interested. He just wants to hold on to that corridor. And it's like, 42 days that Israel has maintained control of the Philadelphia corridor. That's more important to him than the lives of the hostages. But we know that that's not true, at least in negotiating terms, because I'm sure that Blinken said to him in the course of that meeting, you have to be more flexible on this question of who is going to monitor or guard the Philadelphia corridor, which is how Hamas has gotten all the goods in that it got to build the tunnels and to bring in arms and all of that. There's no way that he came out of that meeting and said, Bibi's on board with me and I have no problem with anything that he said and everything is now in Hamas's court. If Bibi didn't say, okay, I'm with you, you go right, I will do what you want me to do. And why could Bibi do that? Because I think he knows that the American role in this has all basically come to an end. Biden is not president anymore. Kamala Harris doesn't want to be engaged with this anymore. They want this out and quiet and off. No major thing is going to happen. And Sinwar knows it, and I think Iran knows it. I mean, obviously, they're afraid of us, and they're afraid of us firing things and protecting Israel. And Kamala said she's going to protect Israel and all of that. But basically, this administration's positive effect on events from now until January is...
Doesn't he also know that Hamas is now led by the genocidal psychopath who organized the October 7th attacks? And so the likelihood
he knows that too, yes.
that Yahya Sinwar would agree to a ceasefire that does not include Israel leaves the Gaza Strip completely is very low. And so I think it's kind of a reasonable gamble to make, to say to Blinken, sure, whatever, fine, I agree, at least put it all in Hamas's court. And Hamas didn't even show up to the Doha talk. And now they sent, I think, some representatives to Cairo, but they immediately said, no, we're not doing that. That's awful. So we're in this kind of treadmill, this diplomatic treadmill that goes on and on and on in parallel to the administration's constant efforts to contain the conflict and prevent it from escalating. I think I would like to know what would happen to the Biden administration if Zeus banned the word escalation. How would they be able to talk about their policy if they couldn't use the word escalation? They would have no policy. They wouldn't know what to do. Everything is about escalation management. While the very effect of that policy over the last 3.5 years has made violence and war and terrorism worse.
This is a very good point, because the New York Times and the Washington Post headlines over the weekend said Israel strikes at Hezbollah's missiles. Let's just talk for a minute about the war in the north between Israel and Hezbollah. We're told that there's a territorial dispute that is undergirding the entirety of this conflict, right? It's a dispute between Israel and the Palestinians. Palestinians deserve self-determination and a homeland. Israel is suppressing them, and then it's destroying Palestinians in Gaza, and it's doing this in the West Bank, and there's Palestinians need this and Palestinians need that. I don't know if people really understand this. I assume a lot of people listening to this podcast do, but there is no territorial dispute in the north, and there are no Palestinians in the north. The border in the north is a border with Lebanon, which is a recognized sovereign state, and Israel was, in fact, in Lebanon until 2000. After its 1982 incursion, it held 18 miles of Lebanese territory, and then it withdrew. And has not been back since. I mean, there was an incursion in 2006 because there was a cross-border war. Israel recognizes Lebanon's border, and Lebanon recognizes Israel's border as a nation. This is a border. Hezbollah, a terrorist group, has occupied 18 miles of Lebanese territory and is firing on Israel. They are not Palestine. I mean, they are not. There is no territorial dispute. This is Iran's war against Israel from Lebanese territory. Period. Therefore, any Israeli strike on Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is firing rockets, you don't even hear the UN saying that there's something illegal. There's nothing illegal. Hezbollah is the aggressor. Hezbollah, one who has been waging war against Israel unilaterally since October 8th from sovereign territory in a country that has existed long before Israel existed. So I don't know. We are in a very different world where you start talking about fears of escalation. The escalation here. What Israel did was de-escalatory. Israel took out thousands of Hezbollah rockets that can now not be fired at Israel, thus de-escalating the threat to itself, not fully, because I don't think these places in the north are going to repopulate anytime soon. But it's a step on the way. And yet, what are the headlines? fears of escalation in the region. There's a fear of escalation. How many rockets has Hezbollah fired at Israel since in the last 10 months?
6,700 last count.
6,700 rockets have been fired at Israel from sovereign territory. And Israel has not invaded that territory on the ground to take out which would be under all rules of law, under every Geneva Convention, under any understanding of a right to self-defense. Israel would have every single right, option, whatever, to go into Lebanese territory.
John, let me just jump in, and I actually want to underscore what you've just said and what Matt just said, because I think this is really important for folks to understand. In the aftermath of the October 7th attacks, Biden comes to Israel, all right, and he stands by Israel's side, and it was a great moment. We all remember it. And the point of the discussion was for him and his advisors to hear what Israel had planned in response to the October 7th attacks. This is not well known, but the Israelis didn't want to invade Gaza. They had actually made the decision that because Hezbollah had started firing on October 8th, that was the real threat, that Hezbollah was, they had the 200,000 rockets and they had the army that had trained alongside Russia and Iran, and that they were the ones that posed the greater threat, and that Israel needed to go for the greater threat, that was the strategic need for the IDF in terms of trying to keep the country safe. That, Hamas is a tactical threat, still is to this day. The Biden administration, the president himself, reportedly, according to folks that I know that were, in the room, apparently he said, don't start a war that you can't finish. And he deterred the Israelis from doing what was necessary. Now, fast forward to where we are today. And as a result of that decision, Israel has lost 100,000 homes in the north. People can't return to their homes. We continue to see these 6,700 different strikes that Israel has absorbed, mostly neutralized, but certainly not entirely. A lot of these anti-tank missiles continue to be fired across the border, doing a lot of damage to homes in the north. In the meantime, so Israel's losing that front, right? Now, in the meantime, the Israelis go south and they start having remarkable success. And the Biden administration says, no, stop. You're actually having too much success, so you need to slow down. So when you take a look at the total impact of U.S. decision-making as it relates to these conflicts, it is just utterly confused, and it has left the Israelis, I think, as you, I think, rightly point out, they've gotten the ammo that they've needed, albeit late, slowed down, but they are now in a potentially worse position than they were when this thing started because of the strategic confusion of the United States.
And in the largest picture, of course, the problem here resides in the confusion or the incredibly bad policy pursued by the Biden administration toward the actual author of this entire conflict, which is Iran. Hezbollah doesn't move without Iran. Hamas doesn't move without Iran. The Houthis certainly don't move without Iran. Biden administration came in determined to change American policy on Iran to, it's not really clear what they wanted or what they want exactly, but they wanted to de-escalate the confrontation of some sort between the Trump administration and Iran, and to find a new path forward with Iran. And this is part of the result. And so this begins in January 2021. It doesn't begin in October 2023. Not really.
It begins in 2013 with the Obama administration starting its outreach.
Right.
This, I think, also, John, gets back to your original point about who believes that the Iranians are reliable peace partners, hoping to come to some sort of agreement here that would de-escalate and calm everything down in the Middle East. I think, sadly, we underestimate the effectiveness of that BS message. I don't think you have to be on crack to believe it. You just have to be deluded somewhere on the liberal side of the spectrum. Talking about Obama, the Obama administration was very effective in pretending and getting the American people to believe that there is a partner for peace in Iran. And I think the Biden administration was trying to go down that same road. And I wouldn't be surprised if Kamala Harris tries to go down that same road as well, modeling so much as they do on the Obama administration.
Honestly, I don't know how effective the Obama administration was. Remember that when the JCPOA, the Iran deal, sort of became law in some fashion, or was allowed to go forward because of a very complicated maneuver that the Obama administration pulled so that it did not submit the JCPOA as a treaty. Won't go into all the details. But when it happened that it was allowed to go through, 2/3 of the American people were opposed to the deal. Americans don't like Iran. That was 10 years ago or 9 years ago, so maybe feelings have softened. I don't remember Trump suffering a single moment of political controversy over his toughening stance on Iran. Obviously in the pages of Foreign Affairs or, in the columns of David Rothkopf and other morons, he was attacked. But that's not anything that had any political saliency. Nobody ran against him as a warmonger with Iran, right? They talked about him as a warmonger with North Korea. They talked about him as a warmonger with whatever. They did not. They talked about how terrible he was
He's a
toward
peacemonger
NATO.
with North Korea.
Right. No, but you know what I'm saying.
His best friend. Yeah.
Yes, his best friend. Right. So I'm just saying it's an interesting thing because I don't know how successful they were. And I note that Kamala Harris found it necessary in her desperate move to pretend to have moved to the center in her nomination speech that she hit at Iran. She said, we're not going to let Iran do whatever. Now, she didn't have to talk about Iran.
This is her new way forward.
Yes,
this is the
exactly.
the new way forward. She's charting for America.
Right. Yeah.
Could end up being slightly more hawkish. We don't know.
I will say though that there is a true fear right now among some in this administration that Iran is going to take advantage of this lame duck period and make a dash to a bomb. And I do think that part of her rhetoric was trying to reflect that she's not going to stand by and allow for it because she is actually in charge at this point, or she's speaking for this White House on some level. But that's sort of where we are. We know that if you've been looking at the statements coming out of the U.S. intelligence community, some really troubling statements coming out, right? Or statements that are no longer appearing in their reports about Iran's nuclear progress. We're potentially at a place where Iran could go nuclear within a few weeks.
Right.
And this is what has got this White House very nervous right now.
Okay, I have to, again, not disagree with you because I don't know, but my speculation is that that there was absolutely nothing in that speech that represented an effort to lay down any markers on how the world should be between now and when she would theoretically take office.
She did raise her voice, John.
Yes.
So that's how you know
I
she
going to say,
needs
I'm
to
not
be
sure
taken
I saw
seriously.
one marker. Was there a marker for anything in that speech?
No, but here's why I brought this up about the fact that she mentioned Iran in the speech and talked, sounded a little tough, which is I don't think there was a sentence in that speech that was not market tested or poll tested. There was not an issue she brought up. There was not a piece of phrasing that had not gone through some kind of a check with not just the people who were in the room, but with some form of public opinion. And I think Iran wouldn't have been in that speech if they did not think that this was something that polled well with the people that she needed to appeal to, which was of interest to me, obviously, because I would not necessarily have expected that. to be
Well,
the case.
I mean, I know this is going to be, political, but it's interesting that she had that moment in the speech. It came about midway through. My attention was fading before she turned to national security. And weirdly, national security, that midsection kind of got the speech going again. So she was able to end in a pretty high energy place with the crowd. But then they followed up this weekend. She hasn't done any public events since the end of the convention. And it doesn't look like she'll go out onto the trail again until later this week when she and Tim Walz are going to do a bus tour of southern Georgia. However, the campaign did release a TikTok of her being a commander-in-chief type vice president, set to Gangsta's Paradise with her in the helicopter. I don't know what they designate the helicopter when she's in it, but it would be Marine One if the president were in it, and saluting soldiers, taking selfies with soldiers. All of this says to me that the Harris campaign is concerned with her demonstrating that she's a plausible commander-in-chief to the voting public. She has
to point out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just point out just one little thing about this? That it's a TikTok video. Like,
right.
Honestly, she's using a Chinese propaganda outlet in order to promote herself as a commander-in-chief. I mean, the irony of that is pretty thick.
Also, shouldn't have been the Ride of the Valkyries. Just if she's in a helicopter, you want to evoke it. You want to evoke, you want to evoke Apocalypse Now with the Agent Orange. The dropping of the of Agent Orange in Apocalypse Now. If you really want to get that across. Okay, I'm dating myself again. That movie is 55 years old, so it's embarrassing. But nonetheless, that is a kind of indelible image. If you show someone riding around in a helicopter, that is going to somehow evoke Apocalypse Now. But yeah, they want to project strength, and so the reason that you woke up is that, of course, the first half of the speech was, "Don't worry, I am going to be your mommy. I'm going to tuck you into bed at night. I'm going to give you milk and cookies. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. And I'm going to use lethal force. Lethal. I will be lethal." She used the word lethal. It's interesting. I don't know whether the word lethal. I can tell you that when you have a tough type of administration, the rhetoric is always softened. If you're Reagan, a story from my time at Reagan has not a foreign policy story, but a domestic story, was a passage in a speech that I wrote for Reagan that had to do with the death penalty. And I'd written a very purple sentence. It was something like, "If you do something or other and all that, you will meet the full justice of the American people and be put to death," or something like that. And my boss scratched it out and he said, "You can't talk like that. It sounds too bloodthirsty. You just have to say they will face the death penalty," or something like that. Don't go too far. There's no reason to. The death penalty is final enough. And and I know we're all sort of, this was in the middle of the crime wave, and I can't remember what the specific circumstances were, but everybody was sort of thirsting for blood, and he was like, "You can't have the president of the United States thirst for blood unless the person who wants to be president of the United States is like the last person in the world you expect to thirst for blood, in which case she's going to say, we're going to be lethal, 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 lethal." So I thought that was pretty striking.
Well, we did have a friend
of
the pod chime in on this question over the weekend, John, and I think he made an important point, which is to say that Harris has to emphasize the word lethal because she is part of an administration that has sought to cut the defense budget every year in which they have been in office. So you say lethal because you actually want to shortchange the military and say, okay, don't worry, we'll still be lethal, even though I'm cutting defense. And of course, with the inflation, you have a real cut in defense, right. Even though the Biden proposals were not actually effected into law.
I mean, that is an important point, but it does get to, again, the fact that what they need is to sound like they mean business, but they only need to sound like they mean business. That's the question. Do they think that they actually need to mean business? And that's where the last 10 months and the behavior, as you mentioned, of Zelensky in the last month and Bibi in the last month suggest that that it is now that the people who are fighting for, freedom and justice and all of that on the planet Earth have decided that the Biden administration does not really mean business, no matter what it says, and that they are going to have to make unilateral decisions that may make their main sponsor, their main supporter angry, but that the failure to do that means defeat. And so better that they get them angry and try to win than that they remain friends and go down to defeat. So that's an. Now I want to take a turn into Israel's own domestic conversation. And in this case, once again, I'm going to recommend that people listen to our friend and commentary board member and commentary contributor Dan Senor's podcast, Call Me Back, his latest podcast, because he recorded it Sunday morning after the strike with two very mainstream to liberal left Israeli journalists, Nadav Eyal and Ronan Bergman. Ronan Bergman writes sometimes for the New York Times and others. He is a sort of known as someone with deep sources in the military and in intelligence, and Nadav Eyal is also sort of like a military journalist of some vintage. And what was striking about this was their almost complete dismissal of the value of what happened Saturday night, Sunday morning. And this was the take, in my view. It was layered, it was complicated. And Nadav Eyal concluded the podcast by saying, Israel has to deal with the North. This is Israel pulled back 20 years ago from Lebanon, and the situation there has gotten worse over the last 2 decades, vastly worse for the communities in the North, and this cannot be allowed to stand. So that was fun. But what they both said was, they hit it and they did it and it was fine, but it actually didn't change the status quo. The North will still be depopulated. And what's really important here is that this is going to retard the move toward a hostage deal. And that without the hostage deal and the end of the war in Gaza through a hostage deal is the only way to move on to the next period in which thus and such can happen. And the clear intimation or suggestion was that Bibi doesn't want a hostage deal because he doesn't want to end the war in Gaza. And I only bring this up, and you should listen to it. It's complicated, but because one of the things when we're talking about American public opinion and all of this, and people who listen to the podcast who are part of the sort of supporters of Israel's war, or supporter Zionists who are looking at this, don't quite understand the array of forces against the Netanyahu government, and not just the government here, but the entire cabinet, which were making some of these decisions. Much of the military establishment in Israel has gone dovish and wants the war to end now, almost unilaterally. And Bibi Netanyahu, or the government, is saying, we are now in a position where if we can bring this war to a conclusion, having partially, having destroyed most of Hamas's capability, if not all of it, killing off most of its senior leaders, if not all of them by the end, and if we can maintain a hold on this one piece of territory at the border, the Philadelphia corridor, to prevent a resupply to Gaza from Egypt, a supply chain that has been open for 12 years at least, and that therefore Israel has no reason to believe Egypt would itself unilaterally close or take care of, or some international force would make sure that it could not be used again as a passageway to reconstitute the military and financial strength of Hamas. That this effort might well be in vain. And so, but there is this world of people saying, we're done. This is enough. You can't kill an idea. We can't hold on to the Philadelphia corridor. It's not worth it. We need to get the hostages back. We have to get the hostages back. And you are stopping that, and therefore you're a bad person. You're a bad person. You're mean. You don't care about the hostages. You're hateful. You're just trying to stay in power. And militarily, there is no argument against Netanyahu's position. There may be a larger argument to be made that the war has gone on long and that Israel has to take a risk to get the remaining hostages back, because it's just the country's spirit is broken without them back. But this idea that somehow the war will not come to an inconclusive end if Israel withdraws from the Philadelphia corridor without any assurance that it will no longer be a way for Gaza to rearm and resupply itself? Really? I mean, is that a serious argument?
So, John, let me weigh in on a couple of these things, because I think there are a couple of important issues that you've just touched on. One, I'm going to be a little blasphemous here and say something that is, I mean, you can't say it out loud in Israel, and it's hard to even say it here among certain circles, and that is that the two stated war aims of Israel, namely to defeat Hamas, win the war, that's one, and then get the hostages back as number two, they may not be achievable together. You might have to choose one. And if you have to choose one, you have to choose to win the war. And I do think that that is what Bibi has prioritized, and he's taken a lot of heat for it, right? And so he refuses to bend on certain issues when he's being pushed by the United States or when he's being pushed by the Qataris or the Egyptians. That's one. Two, the Philadelphia corridor, let's just be honest, the tide of this war has started to turn once Israel took control of the Philadelphia corridor. And that's not a surprise, because when you control your enemy's supply lines, you ultimately gain an edge over your enemy. And that's what Israel's enjoying right now, as we watch Hamas grow weaker by the day. And he should get full credit for that. He's not getting it primarily because the Egyptians are losing their minds. They want Israel out of the Philadelphia corridor because they want to be able to, I guess, probably pull in more money from Iran or Qatar or whoever was remunerating them for operating those supply lines. But the thing is that even if the IDF folks, the sort of deep state of Israel, even if they're correct that at some point Israel needs to leave, they can't leave until they have addressed the literal underlying problems. They need to get underground. They need to install the systems that they have along the rest of the border so that they can identify and prevent cross-border smuggling. That's going to take weeks, months. It's going to require the Egyptians to buy into this. And so all the howling about Bibi needing to get out of there, it's simply not tenable right now. It might be, let's say, in September, October, November, but that's not something that Bibi should cede up front. It should be part of the negotiation. And I think when people start attacking him, and look, I'm not giving him a free pass. I think the guy lacks a strategy in the north. I think the guy lacks a strategy vis-a-vis Iran. I mean, with the successes that we've seen notwithstanding, there's still a problem. And I would blame him for that. But not getting back the hostages, I mean, how many raids can the guy try to carry out? How much, fighting can he do at his own expense, right? I mean, he's not winning the war. It's a slog, and everybody can see it. I think a lot of this is unfair, and I do think that, look, Ronan Bergman and Nadav Eyal can put out good work. There's no question about it that they know a lot of what they're talking about. But I think there is a groupthink right now in Israel where they're ganging up on Bibi for the wrong reasons. There are right reasons to go after him. I'm just not seeing a lot of people articulate that.
It is also worth noting that at some point, the hostage movement became conflated with the Demokratia movement, right? And so the pre-war anti-Bibi protests kind of became conjoined with in the middle of the war, free the hostages, get a deal to free the hostages. And this is at a time when, we don't know how many hostages remain alive, sadly. And I mean, it doesn't look good. And even though you want to get them out, what's more likely to get them out? Signing a flawed deal that will leave Hamas in place and Sinawar alive to emerge to say that he won a great victory against Israel, or continuing to put the military pressure on, continuing to let your intelligence work, continuing to open up opportunities where some of these hostages can be freed through the IDF, as in that remarkable operation earlier this year. I choose the latter course.
This is another area in which the U.S. should take some blame here. The American Democratic politicians have played a big role in conflating criticism of the war with criticism of with sort of anti-Bibi mania, right? When you have Chuck Schumer in the middle of this calling for him to step down and whatnot, they have conflated the pre-October 7th Israeli political issues with the war. They've done a lot to blur things and create this total distortion field around the issue.
Look, not that I'm holding a brief for Netanyahu. I'm really not. I mean, I believe though that Bibi derangement syndrome has now leads to a kind of irrational. What happened this weekend was an extraordinary event in the history of warfare. I don't want to be too grandiose, but Israel wiped out essentially an entire offensive operation on the launch pad 15 minutes before thousands of rockets were set to launch at it automatically, en masse, in order to elude and evade Israel's air defenses through this mass thing. So it prevented potential mass casualties. It prevented an attack that would have required a massive military response that would have required Israel to hit not just southern Lebanon and those sites, but Beirut, because the attack was aimed at population centers or near Israeli population centers in the center of the country. And all of the Hezbollah leadership, according to what I heard on the Call Me Back podcast, are now hiding, I guess, and actually on your morning brief this morning, they're in the north. All the Hezbollah leaders, they're not down there with where the missiles are. They're all hiding in Beirut. So you got to go after them and hit Beirut. That's escalatory. This was, not only was it radically de-escalatory, it was an entirely 100% successful military action. How many of those are there in the history of the world?
I have a question for Jonathan here. There's a lot of talk, excuse me, now about, you see it in the headlines, both after exchange of fire, both Israel and Hezbollah seem to be standing down. Fine, good, well. Doesn't Israel have to press forward on Hezbollah at some point to try to continue to degrade its ability to fire off those thousands and thousands of missiles that could potentially overwhelm Iron Dome at some point? I mean, that is also a long-term or medium-term, or hopefully not short-term, security concern for Israel.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's two ways that people are approaching this right now. And I think, both are problematic. One is get a deal done with Hamas, get the hostages back. And as a result, right, because Hezbollah has vowed that it will stand down if the fighting in Gaza stops, that as a result of a deal that is struck, brokered by the United States and Qatar and Egypt and, with the goodwill of Iran, that is what ends the war in Lebanon. And that's just not happening, right? I mean, I think we can all agree that that's very unlikely. By the way, it also won't actually solve for the problem of the people that have been evacuated from the north. It's not going to solve the problem that, Hezbollah continues to store and fire weapons from southern Lebanon. They still have the problem of getting Hezbollah north of the Litani pursuant to UN resolutions and all kinds of other international demands. The other way is a full-blown war. And in a full-blown war, which we've talked about on this program a few times, Israel's going to lose thousands of its citizens. It's going to probably have apartment buildings toppled. It's going to have strategic infrastructure hit. And I just right now I don't see the Israelis having figured out how to do this cleanly and neatly. And so, they continue to kick the can down the road. And that's where I think I've got my greatest criticism of Netanyahu right now, is that he hasn't figured out how to fix this. And look, maybe there are no easy answers, but that's what he needs to try to figure out, is how does he reduce this threat? Maybe over time, maybe in one fell swoop, but how does he reduce it enough? How does he deter Hezbollah? And he's not been able to figure that out. But this is the big one. Maybe apart from that, we could say that it's the broader threat, what we call the Ring of Fire, all of those proxies potentially still mulling the idea of a multi-front war. But the big one right now is Lebanon.
And if I could just add, there is some role here for the United States, especially in the proxies. The Houthis recently hit this Greek oil tanker, which is now producing a huge environmental catastrophe. And we are continuing our strategy, our de-escalation strategy of really just trying to intercept the Houthi missiles or pinprick strikes on sites where we know where we've launched them. If we could, Vice President Harris, if she's listening to me, this would be a great, bold, new path forward, new way forward. Why don't you really take the fight to the Houthis, building on the Israeli response to the drone a few weeks ago, where they knocked out an entire port just in one strike? Build on that. Really show that you're tough by taking the fight to the Houthis and changing the strategy, which has not reduced the threat at all, which is producing this massive environmental catastrophe with this latest strike. That would be a bold new way forward.
Building on that, what if the Israelis, the United States, and maybe some of the Arab states, maybe some Europeans went about this by literally picking off these proxies one at a time? In other words, you can think about it a couple different ways, right? When you play a game of chess, you can either go right for the king and topple the king, or you can clear off the board, right? What if we start clearing off the board here, and then Hezbollah is the last remaining actor, and it has to decide whether it's willing to, face the consequences of continuing this war? That's the other way of approaching this, right? Take out the bad guys in Iraq, take them out in Syria. We're already pretty near finishing the job in Gaza. The Houthis, I think, are certainly a handleable problem. This is the other way of doing it, and we're not, this is nowhere near the calculus of this administration right now. So we're not threatening Iran. We're not threatening the proxies. We're letting this whole thing limp along and kind of forcing the Israelis to deal with the brunt of it. And fine, maybe maybe that's Israel's burden. But let's not pretend that we have some kind of strategic view of the region and that we have solutions.
The nightmare is that's an interesting strategy. America, particularly America directly engaging with the Houthis, which would be a low-cost, high-return thing for us, basically to destroy the Houthis. Like, who supports the Houthis? I know there are 12 people on campus who are walking around with Houthi flags. This is not a mass movement. Nobody cares about Yemen. Blah 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 blah, and they're destroying world shipping, or they're creating environmental disasters, and for us it's the lowest cost possible thing to take the Houthis out. So let's say that we did that while Israel is taking out Gaza, whatever, and then you have these other players. Or is all of this a kind of ancillary game because you've got to cut the head off? you've got to take out the Death Star, and the Death Star is Iran, and that Iran is the problem. Iran is the problem. All of this stuff, as horrible as what happened in Gaza was, as horrible as all this is, all of this is the geostrategic issue of the first quarter, the first half of the 21st century is dealing with Iran before it gets the bomb, before it really gets the bomb. And it is acting in ways that make it almost insane not to do something about Iran before it gets the bomb, because of course, once it really does get the bomb, then the cost of engaging with Iran goes up 10,000 fold. And we have real incentives not to, and real incentives to let Iran work its will because of the cost that we would face and the world would face should it be as millenarian, irredentist, and apocalyptic as its own theological doctrine says it is supposed to be. So this is a terrifying thing to say, and I don't have an answer to it. I'm just saying it's the thinking about the unthinkable is what is required of people who want to become president of the United States and have this role in the world. And she's there now, the most accidental possible president ever. And if she doesn't think about it now, she's going to be thinking about it in February. And you know what's going to happen, though. Not to be too, is the default for people like that is to just get mad at Israel. They'll just get mad at Israel. They'll be like, none of this would have happened.
Yeah, and don't forget, by
Israel
the way, Yeah. Well, that's for sure. But then she's also got Phil Gordon at her side. And for those who remember Phil Gordon from the Obama years, I mean, this is a guy that
this is her national security advisor. This is Phil Gordon. Yeah.
And one of the architects of the deeply flawed nuclear agreement, and a guy that has refused to try to undermine the regime through covert action. And he's gone on record as saying that he's opposed to it. I mean, we're talking about a truly obsequious public servant here, who is, I think, her whispering in her ear is actually one of the scariest things I can think of.
Well, that's a good place to end on the crushing morosity of the possible future of the United States as we now face it. I did want to say that I was very struck by something politically over the course of this weekend that I can't quite make sense out of. Okay, granted, so the word comes out that Kamala Harris raised $500 million in a month, the greatest fundraising haul in American history. Obviously, she's had a poll surge. We don't know what the polls are going to show this week based on what happened at the convention last week, all of that. I am struck by the fact that she left the campaign trail for a weekend, that she actually took the weekend off. And
a long weekend. She's not doing anything today or tomorrow.
Right, okay. So maybe there isn't much for her to do because now there's no more money that she needs to raise. But again, we're now in the period in which there are going to be real consequences for her not wanting to talk about policy, because there's nothing logistically for her to do campaign-wise, right? She's not going to spend 3 hours a day on fundraising calls because all the money is in. She doesn't have to get people on her side because the entire Democratic Party is on her side. So what is there for her to do to keep the momentum going is to go around and talk and make news and be in headlines and all that. And she doesn't want to do that. And then I'm like, is this has Biden set a new standard, which is that you only work, even when you're president, you only work 4 days a week and you get to take three days off with your husband and make him a brisket, do some cooking.
We're becoming Europe.
Fries. Apparently her fries are really good. That was a big thing this weekend.
I think it could be a big mistake on her part, John.
I think
she lost the weekend. She had a successful convention. There's no doubt about it. The very next day, RFK Jr. endorsed Trump. I know you and I disagree on the potential effect of that endorsement. Nonetheless, that was the story this weekend. The media tried to cover for her. There were two very high-level surrogate interviews on the Sunday shows yesterday. One, Tom Cotton on ABC This Week with Jonathan Karl, and the other, the vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance with Kristen Welker on Meet the Press. It was incredible to me to watch both interviews and see the lengths to which the two media anchors would go to protect Kamala Harris from attack. And despite their efforts, I thought both Cotton and Vance did pretty well. And now you have Trump in Detroit today. He's going to give a talk about the first, well, not the first, unfortunately, what's the third anniversary of the terrorist bombing at Abbey Gate. Trump will be on camera. He's going to give a speech. Harris and Biden have just released written statements. That's not going to be enough. I wonder, actually, if she's going to be forced out to talk sometime tomorrow in order to try to win a news cycle back from Trump ahead of her Georgia tour beginning Wednesday.
That's very interesting. Things are fluid, and no question, she had an extraordinary political month. And like you say, I did not see the Vance interview, but I did watch Cotton and Jonathan Karl, and I not only think that he did quite well, Cotton. I think that he planted. I mean, it's like he planted a very damaging seed there, which is that he forced the media, he surfaced in the media the fact that she has called what he's saying is the abolition of private health insurance. What that, of course, means is socialized healthcare. So the first stage is to say she wants to abolish private health insurance. And then Jonathan Karl said, no, she didn't. And he said, yes, she did. What are you talking about? And then he said, like, well, her surrogate said she doesn't think that anymore. I mean, she did call for it. And of course, that is so that is socialized health insurance, which puts meat on the bones of Trump saying that she is a socialist or a communist. And that, which is a wildly overstated thing to say about somebody who is as obviously as much of a cipher as Kamala Harris is. But having argued with Tom, Karl made that a 2-day story.
Well, and it wasn't just Medicare for all. It was also on the abortion question. Cotton was saying that, look, we know that the only candidate in this race who wants a national abortion law is Kamala Harris, who, if she's elected, will work with the Democrats to pass a law that will basically nullify all state abortion laws and have abortion on demand, taxpayer funded, up to the moment of birth. And Jonathan Karl, I mean, I shouldn't be shocked anymore, but he goes, well, that's not what the Democrats want. and Tom responded by saying, John, I voted on the law. You didn't. It almost had the same effect as when I kept thinking of when Obama had the healthcare summit in 2009, and he was getting all this incoming from McCain. And Obama responded, the election's over, John, I won. I mean, it's like the gall to explain to a United States senator what the position is. And when he's voted on the law, he has to read, and Tom Cotton reads the laws, unlike many senators that he has to vote on. It was mind-boggling. And then I have to say, too, before finishing, Vance had a good zinger. You know, Vance was saying, look, Kamala Harris was in charge of the southern border for the last 3.5 years. And Kristen Welker says, Senator, she was put in charge of finding out the root causes of migration. And Vance came right back and said, well, Kristen, the root cause of migration is Kamala Harris not doing her job. That was a good zinger. I mean, you know, so I feel like these are wasted opportunities for the Harris camp.
I think this is a very honestly. I mean, this is we're in an unprecedented set of circumstances here, and anybody who thinks they can game out the next whatever it is a fool. No one's ever gotten a nomination this fast under these circumstances. everything that you might have predicted, which is the Democratic Party's incredible depression, along with this extraordinary wealth, that once this obstacle to its possible victory and the fact that it was people were finally able to let out a sigh that they had been holding in because they knew the kind of trouble that they were in, this explosion of enthusiasm and money, because Democratic Party is in fact richer than the Republican Party, though people don't really understand that to be the case. That's an amazing phenomenon. But they have to talk. Some things are going to happen every single day. And the very fact, again, Abe, you've been saying she doesn't have to give an interview, that they'll cover for her and all of that. Look, they didn't, as far as I can tell, haven't said anything about what happened yesterday in Lebanon.
No.
To be fair, the U.S. administration, which parked 2 aircraft carriers on the shore of Lebanon to hold Hezbollah in place for 3 months, has all kinds of craft in the Middle East right now. Israel went in and prevented a major prevented a war from starting. That would probably be worth saying something. I know Kamala Harris doesn't want to say anything nice about Israel. I know that. I know first of all, she doesn't feel it. And second of all, she's worried about, 5 guys in Dearborn, Michigan, who are uncommitted, having a tantrum on, in their newspaper. Dearborn, interesting, of course, the home of the Dearborn Independent. That's something very few people have brought up, that the most anti-Semitic newspaper in the history of America 100 years ago, run by Henry Ford, called the Dearborn Independent. We're now back in Dearborn with the anti-Semites. It's really great. I know she doesn't want to, but as a matter of hygiene, of political hygiene, in terms of winning the day or having something to do with talking about the news.
Look,
go ahead.
I've remained somewhat quiet on this part of the conversation because I feel like a broken record. I think that we are grossly underestimating the degree to which she can keep this up, to which she doesn't have to comment, to which she will be covered for not commenting. The length of time before anything resembling an actual in-depth discussion of how do you feel about the world? What is America's position vis-a-vis Israel? What's your long-term vision for Gaza post-war? And how do you see Iran's role in this? And what does that change the American calculus at all? She's never going to get anywhere near those questions for the longest time. I agree with you,
Abe. But I will say this, as we're recording this podcast, Trump is at Arlington National Cemetery in a surprise appearance, laying a wreath with the families of the 13 service members killed at the Abbey Gate in 2021. And Doug Mills just posted a photograph of it. These are powerful images. This is what a presidential campaign is about. And she's at the Naval Observatory, probably doing a practice debate. John is right. Who knows what's going to happen? But every moment counts now, and you want to win every day. And Trump is already off to a pretty strong day.
I mean, remember, Irving Kristol used to say this, which is that teams that base their strategy for winning a football game on the prevent defense are going to lose in the fourth quarter. And if she's already playing prevent defense, that might be a good thing to do the last 2 weeks. Trump did it the last 2 weeks in 2016. He just played a prevent defense, let the Comey chips fall where they may, and that was a pretty good strategy. But that was like right up to the election. That was like the election was coming right on. There's 2 months to go yet. And again, I'm not. You could be right, Abe. I have no idea. I have no idea. All I do know, and I know that the press will do everything that it can. I do know that. If I told you where we were going to be, this is what, August 26th, on June 26th? June 26th was the day before the debate. June 26th was the day before the debate. If I had said, you know what's going to happen? Biden's going to bomb the debate. There's going to be a whole thing. Trump's going to get assassinated. assassination attempt. Kamala will unify the party without a single vote and raise $500 million. You would not have known that that was going to happen. You might have said, okay, yeah, he's going to bomb the debate and then the Democrats are going to panic, but you would probably have thought he was going to survive it. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's just no way of gaming this out. But their strategy is caution, and caution is not necessarily the greatest strategy when you are in a situation that is, if it's not a jump ball, if she's a little ahead, she's still only ahead by 2 points in a basketball game, and that, you know, a 3-point shot can change that in a second. So that's the limit of my sports analogies. I'm embarrassed to have gone to sports analogies. It's a terrible
It's
thing
wonderful.
when I do sports analogies. Okay. Jonathan Schanzer, as ever, unbelievably enlightening. Everybody, the FDD morning brief is on at 8:30. Is that right? Every morning. You can click through to it on X or go to fdd.org or go to YouTube and search morning brief. Incredibly helpful. I don't get to watch as much as I want because we're often taping at the same time, but we will of course have you back, and hopefully not wildly frequently, because that'll probably mean that things are not so terrible. But whatever. I think we had you on at a time when things actually aren't terrible. We had you on to talk about something that was kind of remarkable.
Tend to agree.
There we go. We'll be back tomorrow. For Abe and Matt, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.